Welcome back. We left off last time with a whole new exercise that is to create something using Blender primitives, and I hope this exercise gave you a chance to practice, to get familiar with Blender. What you see on the monitor is an example of what could be done with simple primitives. I inserted spheres, cubes, and as you can see, also a figure that on the surface is not part of Blender's primitives. But instead we will see that this figure can be inserted simply by using a cylinder with 3 sides, and I hope in doing this exercise you noticed some things. For example, sometimes it would be convenient to be able to hide meshes so that we can see what is underneath when, for example, I go to insert a new object with Shift+A. Let's say I want to insert a cube. Here this appears to me, however, inside the scene I have already made because the cube is inserted at the height of the 3D cursor, so it might be convenient to be able to momentarily hide these objects. We can do this by selecting them and pressing the H key, or we can use the outliner with this eye icon. By clicking with the mouse we can view or hide each object. This can help us to go to work better in the areas that are a little bit more hidden. I'll point out, as we also mentioned in a previous lesson, that we can click and drag with the mouse to apply this change to all the items that are in the list, and then we can, with a very quick gesture, go to hide and revisit very quickly any object. On the other hand, if we want to work exclusively with the keyboard abbreviation with the H key, we hide the object with the abbreviation Alt+H. Instead, we go back to revisualize all the objects that were previously hidden. Another thing you might have noticed, though, is that rather than going to insert the cube and then going and looking for it among the other objects, we could have simply made the cube appear in another location. For example, outside of these spheres that have already been inserted within our scene. How to do that? We need to move the 3D cursor. To do this is very simple. We hold down the Shift key and right-click at the point where we want to go to move the cursor. For example, we want to make the next object appear on the surface of this sphere. We hold down the Shift key and right-click at the point we want. There goes the 3D cursor, and if we go to insert a new cube or any other object, it will appear at the desired location. Another thing you might have noticed is that selecting objects, yes, it is convenient with the left mouse button. However, sometimes you need to be able to select multiple objects at the same time, or otherwise be able to handle a large amount of objects, and then with just the mouse click you can struggle. We will see how Blender comes to our aid precisely for handling objects in more complex scenes and also precisely for selecting these objects. Finally, another thing that I hope you have noticed is that manipulators, for example the displacement manipulator, cannot always be used as we would like. For example, take the roof of this little house. If we wanted to slide it back and forth with respect to its direction with the displacement manipulator, we could not do so, because if we go to act on the X or Y axis, they are not rotated with respect to the rotation of the roof, and therefore we find ourselves performing unwanted displacements. Well, in today's lesson we will see a little bit how to solve all these things. However, I invite you to write in the comments of this lesson what are the difficulties that you have encountered. If you have come up with any ideas, any needs, any commands that you wish you could have had, any tools that came to your mind. I wish I could have had this tool. Here, write it down in the comments. Write what your difficulties were and maybe even how you solved them. Well, how do we move this roof so that it flows along its direction and not along the global X and Y axis? Blender also gives us the possibility to work with local axes, that is, the coordinates that the object carries behind it. If you want to use this file as well, I'll leave you the link in the description of this video so you can download it freely, and let's go together to see how to move, for example, this roof along its direction. You should know that Blender makes available to us not only the X, Y, and Z scene coordinates that we have already learned about, but it also gives us the possibility to use different reference systems. We can select these systems in this menu. Here at the top, right now, Global is selected, which is the global reference axis of the scene. But if we click in this drop-down menu, we see that there are many more types of reference systems, and moreover, this little plus we see next to Global suggests that we can get even more, That is, we could even get custom systems of our own reference systems. But let us focus for the moment on our roof. If instead of global we go to select local, we see that the manipulator arrows have changed. The Z-axis has gone in the direction of the roof pitches, and the X and Y axes have moved accordingly. But how does Blender figure out how it should turn these arrows? What do you mean local axis as opposed to global axis? If we go to view the information about our object, we press the N key if we don't have the right sidebar open, and we go to the Item tab so we see the information about the roof. This same information can also be found here within the Object panel of the Properties window. I prefer to use the right sidebar because then I am free to be able to view other information in this separate window at the same time. However, you are free to safely use this editor as well. We see that this object turns out to be rotated along the X-axis by 90 deg, along the Y-axis by 180 deg, while on the Z-axis by 798 deg. It is because of these numbers that Blender understands how the object is rotated, and so when we go to say use local axis, he gets the information about the position of the arrows from this very trio of rotation values. So now, once the local reference system is enabled, we can safely slide our roof forward and backward, right, left, in a very simple way. Even in the case of applying scale, it can be useful, at least visually, to have the local axis to be able to understand how we are enlarging, tightening our figure following its geometry. Another example of the usefulness of local axes we can see by going to make the windows of this house. We could simply use this cube. We duplicate it with Shift plus D, then scale it up. And we go and position the mesh as if it were a window. If we didn't have the local axis available, this would have been a much more difficult job. Let's give it a try. Let's go back to global axis, so we duplicate our cube. We scale it, and now if we want to go and place it on the facade of our little house, yes, we may be able to do that. But it's by no means such a trivial thing because we can't use the arrows directly. We have to go a little bit by trial and error. While on the other hand, by switching to local axis, the game becomes much easier. On the other hand, for those who prefer to use displacement, scaling or rotation exclusively through keyboard abbreviations, there is the possibility anyway to move to global or local axis. Let's give it a try. Let's put ourselves back in the global reference system, then go and duplicate our cube again with Shift plus D, and then move it with the mouse. Well, we want to make this one move parallel to the house. If we press the X key once we activate the global X axis, that is the scene axis, but if we press X a second time here, we see that the axis aligns with the rotation of the cube. So if we press an axis letter twice, Blender understands that we don't want to use global reference system, but we want to use local reference system. In a nutshell, we can safely work using keyboard abbreviation without using manipulators because we know that we can call up the local reference system on the fly by pressing the required axis letter twice. For example, let's make a scale along the Y-axis, so we press S, Y. However, in order to scale it parallel to the house trend, we press Y a second time, and now the scaling happens in the desired direction. Do some trial and error, experiment freely. Good. Let's see now how Blender helps us select objects instead. We have seen that we can select one at a time, and with the Shift key, as we would in any other software, we can add objects to the selection. So if we click while holding down the Shift key, the objects will add to the selection, and the last selected object will always have this lighter orange outline. That means it is the active object, the last selected object. We will see later on the importance of this object. However, this may not be the fastest selection system. Let us see what else is given to us. When we talk about selection, we are really talking about the ABCs. These are 3 letters that we can use to select in Blender. With the A key, we select everything. Let's do it together. You see, you have selected all the objects in the scene, and we also see it inside the outliner. To deselect everything, we press the A key twice in quick succession, then A, and Blender deselects everything. Another way to deselect everything is to use the keyboard shortcut, Alt+A. Use the B key to go to the selection by window. You see that a cross has been activated, and this allows us to draw, by dragging with the mouse, a selection window that will fetch all the objects that are intersected or included within the window. I also encourage you, as with all Blender commands, to see what options are made available to us when running the command in the lower left-hand corner. Always do some experimentation. Finally, we have the C key. With the C key, we get a cursor that can be zoomed in or out using the mouse wheel. And with this cursor, we can go click by dragging, brush-like clicking, which goes to select anything that is touched. Again, in the lower left corner, we see all the various options. The equivalent of the A, B, and C buttons, we find them here on the left side in the tool shelf. If we click, we get the selection by box. You can't see the cross cursor, but the pane is say active by default. If we click and hold, we also see the other types of selection. That is the circular selection or the selection by the irregular geometric figure. So we can trace the path to go and select multiple objects at the same time. I invite you to try it out. Try all these selection commands and also try the A, B, and C keys at the same time. The selection system, however, does not end there. Blender provides us with a much more refined selection system with very powerful commands. In fact, you see that there is a real menu called Select. And if you want to go deeper into the use of these selection commands, I would like to point you to the lessons on modeling in Blender that you can always find within this channel and whose link I put in the description of this video. Well, that's it for this lesson. As an exercise for next time, I invite you to experiment with the use of local and global axes and also go experiment on your own with the use of the other types of reference systems. Try them out. Try them out and see what happens. Don't be afraid because we already know you can't do any harm. Another thing that I encourage you to experiment with are selection systems, and if you like, to also go and see the lectures that I put the link to in the video description, just that go into more detail about selection systems in Blender. As always, I thank you for following along, and I will see you again soon.